Hello everybody and welcome back to another Future of the Fortress. This is the monthly Q&A that happens on the Bay 12 forums talking about everything related to Dwarf Fortress. If you would like to take part in these discussions, I will link to the forum threads in question down in the description of this video. But before we can dive into the actual questions themselves, we will begin with the Bay 12 Games monthly report for December 1st, 2025. Toady writes, "We've been doing updates on the Siege update and will continue working on those for a bit, while we solidify our plan for the next push. Hopefully, we'll have more information on that this month. And we sold 17,000 copies of the game in November, so the Siege update and associated Steam sale went pretty well. Thank you, Tarn." And with all that complete, let's move on to the future of the fortress itself, beginning with our first question from NMJ. And they write, "Watching your Siege update trailer, I found it odd that the trolls carried bricks. It seems more efficient for trolls to carry a huge bundle of logs rather than a pallet of bricks for the purpose of constructing scaffolding to scale the walls or bridge gaps." And Tarn's response is, "I thought the same, but the goblin civs didn't have wood, so I use bricks when wood is not available. They should source wood locally, but that's more of a project to implement." And our next question from NMJ is as follows. "When the Steam version, Adventure Mode, came out, I finally had the chance to explore the area surrounding my fort, and started to feel certain attachment to these sites. They were no longer just the humans or the elves, it was a human or elf village with identity. So now it feels odd that we get caravans like clockwork from civs, and not additional caravans from the neighboring sites." And Tarn's response is, "This is part of the plan, using surrounding sites to create a sort of fair, with multiple depots in the fort, or something akin to depots. We want to make commerce and interaction with the fort more vibrant and localized, while maintaining the international caravans as well, with more diplomacy and trade options." And NMJ follows up with a final question. "I'm reading The Hobbit, and I enjoy how the elven and human kings commissioned magic items from the Lonely Mountain dwarves. Is there any chance our forts will ever receive requests from neighboring nobles to fashion magnificent gear for them?" And Tarn's response is, "It would be cool. We'll see things go once we have magical artifacting." Next up, we have a two-parter from the AP, and they say, "Z-layers are my favorite abstract concept in the game. They can contain an entire bronze colossus while also being small enough to have a dwarf cross one stairs in the same time it roughly takes to walk a few feet. How big do you imagine a single Z-level being, when we aren't considering exceptionally large monsters occupying them, at least?" And Tarn's response is, "The general guideline is that a tile is 2 meters x 2 meters x 3 meters tall. This is the only guideline, of course, since many creatures would not fit in a single tile, and the elevations don't make any sense, and building walls are too thick, etc., etc. But it's the general vibe." The second question from the AP is as follows. "What is your favorite abstraction and consequence of an abstraction you have deployed in making the game?" And they add on with, "My second favorite abstraction is water and ice breaking physical properties, because everything sinks in water, including ice, meaning that before air, water not only weighs less and is less dense than itself in a frozen form, but also is the next lightest thing to gases in theory, which explains why dwarves don't like drinking it and would rather settle for heavy ale." And Tarn's response is, "I don't like any of my abstractions, even if some of them are necessary." The next question comes in from Sooner535, and they quote Tarn from a previous Future of the Fortress post, where Tarn wrote, "Nothing new happens outside of your fortress. The release is focused on overcoming a loaded area, and invasions don't happen in loaded areas elsewhere, such as Adventure Mode. So, Sooner's question is as follows. Is there any plans to eventually have this mechanic? I was wondering how cool it might be, with the eventual ability to switch between Adventure Mode and Fort Mode more freely to send a group of dwarves to defend an allied human settlement, or help an ally besiege it, though I imagine that sort of thing would need to come after places are a little bit more fleshed out and such." And Tarn's response is, "It has been in the long-term plans forever. Tackling the camera or having multiple loaded in areas is a huge project, and we were going to take it on as part of the map rewrite, but now the map rewrite is cut out into pieces, and we'll see where this sort of thing comes in. It's quite possible you'll have more options for using your squads in an abstract way involving allies before then. And a question from Juice Seeger, and they say, if another type of hostile, a Werebeast or Forgotten Beast, Megabeast or Snatcher, etc., happened to have a pickaxe equipped, would it be able to dig into my fortress, or are digging strategies reserved for sieges? And what game parts or components does the enemy need to start digging or building? Does it need to have a commander, for example? And Tarn's response is, no, the pathing calculations are expensive, so they are reserved for formal invasions right now. A commander is not required for them to carry out their building or digging paths. It's possible that it should be, or that the plan shouldn't update once the commander is dead and not replaced. The next question is from Vanzetti, with a pretty abstract one. Will you be interested to have legends change as time passes, such as the events as they are remembered become different from the events as they occurred, possibly ending up with different versions of history for different civilizations? And Tarn's response is, it's been on our radar starting with having multiple creation myths and such, but it's just adjacent to the general lies and other difficult to store and process information. Tracking what people know and understand becomes much, much harder when it can be wrong in different ways. Now, Beeg comes in with a two-parter, but I'm going to run them together because they're both very short. And they say, will adventurers be able to acquire the powers of the new demonic sorcerers in the Siege update in any way? And will adventurers be able to find demonic sorcerers in goblin sites? And Tarn's quick response is, this really depends on how the exact knowledge transfer works. If it requires years of supernatural torture in a demon prison as a kidnapped child, then no. If the demon has kindly prepared study notes for the brisk learning and enjoyment, then yes. And like the current necromancers, future wizards of all sorts will be findable where they are. And another two-parter from Stained Class, but Tarn answers them as one, so we'll just read through. And they write, is it planned to rebalance or even modify existing spells? I notably think about some being useless, like blisters, or insanely OP, like paralysis on a breathing creature, is guaranteed death, or even somewhat broken. Enemies using Vanish cannot be targeted by the player adventurer. They can't even swing their weapon in some direction, hoping to touch at the invisible enemy. And what other spells do you think to introduce first? How many characters learn spells? Would these be allowed by holding a magical item, reading a slab, and turning the reader into a magician different from a necromancer? Gifts from gods to their chosen ones? And most ardent worshippers, or other means? And Tarn quotes a post from The Marmot as well as Eric Blank, so I will read their posts first. Marmot writes, I doubt Toady would change existing spells, at least for the foreseeable future. But I do agree that there should always be ways to counter these spells in mundane or magic ways, such as magic charms against certain afflictions and or throwing powder to make an invisible enemy, for example. I think that's already planned, though. And Eric Blank responds with, bug fixing is always on the table, like with the Vanish spell. NPCs can see and attack them, but I can't, which coincidentally makes it useless for the player. I would be the only one unable to see and attack myself. I'm still hoping to be able to tie interactions and enchantments to objects through reactions or equivalent, though. One thing I've really wanted to do for years. And Tarn's response is, magic is all subject to change. We've talked about it variously for years. Everything's on the table and we're going to narrow it down as we settle on the next plan. The siege-related magic and defenses are the ones currently on the roadmap, which we didn't get to for the Siege update, and those make sense as a place to start. But it's not fully decided. I'm not entirely about balance. The imbalance from magic is kind of the whole point from one perspective anyway. There should be death spells, and merely annoying spells, but they should be more intelligently used, and their ramifications and counter-reactions should be more fully realized. And a question comes in from Nalia, and they say, Have you ever considered on expanding the functionality of the world map? Stuff like sending out your own caravans to other sites, hunting parties to hunt and catch animals, and maybe send out rangers to scout around your fortress, and give you early warning of incoming monsters and sieges. I think it would be neat if we could interact with the wider world a bit more from our fortress. And Tarn's response is, yep. Not only has it been vaguely on the table for a long time, like many other features, but we've got several specific plans approaching now related to this. Doing resource work off-site, interacting variously with nearby sites, interacting with nearby armies, and larger distance interactions with messengers and caravans. There are a lot of different directions to explore, and some of it should be happening fairly soon. Now, next up we got 2 questions about Gunpowder, so I will read both of them as well as a response from DPH Kraken and a response from Fantastic Dwarf before reading Tarn's response to the question. Stained Class asks first, according to the wiki, you have plans to include gunpowder later, but only for simple uses. What would these simple uses be? Explosives to blow up small parts of the map like low-cost TNT from Minecraft? Rudimentary grenades, perhaps, or bombards, or even arquebuses. Arquebuses? I don't even know what that is. Please correct me in the comments. Talking about more advanced technology, do you have plans for civilizations to unlock stuff by leading researches and find new technologies? I know I'm starting to delve into the suggestion territory, but I'm thinking about using stuff like scholars to lead researches and unlock new stuff like steel or bolt throwers for the whole civ. And as an addition to the question, a curious cat writes, are petards considered a simple use of gunpowder? If so, will we, perchance, get to see engineers, or more accurately, their assistants, the sappers, hoist by their own petards? As mentioned earlier in the post, Tarn quotes DPH Kraken as well as Fantastic Dwarf, so we will be reading their responses first. And Fantastic writes, I think it's been mentioned in previous Future of the Fortress replies, but I think you may be reading too much into it, given that the actual DF Wiki article doesn't clarify its own claim to a bibliography of quotations. Probably the last time I heard it mentioned was about when the workers' guilds were added for master and apprentice relations as representations of the pinnacle of their craft, more than any mass standardization. They can make a forge in a kind of capacity. Though you'd have to forgive me, trying to find where my anecdote originated is also hard to pin down, because there's many months and pages to search through. I do think it's still interesting though, with the current focus of the fortress with recalibrated destructive properties, and would be the place to introduce it. And you can get some soft effects with DFHack scripts that force the tile destruction after projectile makes contact, and even a billow of smoke post-firing, but not to outshine the Siege Update Part 2. And for the sake of specificity, DPH Kraken arrives with some receipts. There was mention on DF Talk Episode 8 of Gunpowder. I'll post a few quotes from it. And for the sake of this video, I'll have the editor insert the audio in question, right about now.
But the kind of the thing that's on the table is gunpowder, right? Black powder, and the materials that you need for that in the game are already in the game. I think we are not against kind of coding up the code necessary to get that kind of thing to work. At the very least, just blowing the crap out of things. Maybe not making a gun or something, but blowing the crap out of things. And that probably wouldn't be in the most vanilla Dwarf Fortress. After we see it in action and seeing it, perhaps not spoiling the mood entirely, it might make it in, but certainly would support that kind of thing shortly after chemistry starts to take off. There just kind of need to be one extra function there that says what an explosion does, and after that you can start to work with ideas like what about things like cannons or mines or whatever you want to do, and we can slowly work with that. But the farther afield you go, the more that it would be kind of deprioritized or whatever.
And in the year 2025, Tarn's response is, blowing things up would probably be fun, but really anything before the year 1400 is allowed, and that gets us an awfully long way. It's not a super high priority, but it's fair. like digging invaders, it would be a turn-offable thing, or part of the settings for the world you create. Petards specifically appear to be outside of the cutoff, but various bombs were lobbed before then, and I'm sure much else. Matchlocks and trigger-bearing firearms appear to be out of range, but certain hand cannons appear legal. And linking libraries and scholars to actual in-game technologies is one of the big issues with the game, and it's complicated not to just implement, but it has problems. It's essentially removing content from the game, and the game still feels quite light on content, but it's definitely something that feels like it should be done to make scholars more meaningful. And we've got some questions from Squanamus, and they say, as of the Siege update, the logic for armor levels seems to have changed. In the past, melee soldiers had armor level 2, and it seemed to be universally equipped with metal armor. Now it seems like this is no longer the case, with some other effects as well. For example, if you made 2 sets of armor, one for level 1 exclusively for archers and made only from leather, and another for level 2 for melee guys and exclusively made of metal, the melee units would wear the second armor set, but it would be made of cloth and leather. I'm not sure if this is a bug or a byproduct of the new intended armor logic, but I am curious to know what the new rules for NPC armor and uniforms are, if it is intentional, or if even half intentional with a bug here or there. If it is an artifact of new equipment that are here to stay, knowing these rules could help modders in the future. And Tarn's response is, there are new rules for invaders. They aren't allowed to have the best equipment unless they sacrifice other advantages in a given siege. This percolated through all of the armor code, so it's not surprising that there are various melee units that have been downgraded. The new rules are here, but they need to be applied better for things like adventure mode, bandits, etc., I think. The next question from Squamos is, will ASCII ever be getting the ability to view floors below the one you are on, like the graphical version? A third-party utility existed for this, but it was buggy, and I don't think is supported anymore. I think it would make ASCII a lot more accessible if the terrain could be visualized three-dimensionally like the graphic version allows for, even if nothing else changes. And Tarn's response is, the colors are still an issue here. It could be done now, but I don't think it works with 16 colors. And the last question from Squamos, and they say, I understand that this can't be answered, or you would prefer not to, but I work on a total conversion mod for the game, and I'm considering commissioning an OST for it, but I don't know what the costs involved would be. So I'd like to know, if possible, how much the current soundtrack to Dwarf Fortress cost, so I can budget accordingly, as I'm hoping for a similar amount of tracks. And Tarn's response is, it depends on too many factors. As I understand it, for example, we were able to pay standard rates for the adventure mode soundtrack, but the standard rates versus a soundtrack will vary a lot depending on different personnel required, etc. I don't want to give particulars without Dabu and Simon's say, but the accepted industry rates for a given year should be findable. Hopefully you can negotiate something in your budget that's fair. The next question comes in from Cryosync, and they say, I'm curious, was the ogres like a special case, or will more goblin-adjacent creatures be given some freakish new tile work? And Tarn's response is, the ogre and blind cave ogres were a special case, because of their siege equipment not being reflected, and because they were too close to other large humanoid sprites, but we'll continue improving and expanding upon the artwork as we go. And a question from Doran I, and they say, hey Toady, how does the wall and durability system work? Do walls made of steel or obsidian with their superior material values take longer for siegers to mine through and batter down? And how do reinforced walls work? Thanks. And Tarn's response is, it's all a bit of a hack since there are lots of apples and oranges in the material calculations, but it does the same thing it does for bruising and permanent deformation when attacking a creature. So it runs the sim against the material, and then assesses if there would be a fracture or a permanent deformation or an edged slice, and then adds some percentage of damage counter based on that. There's a minimum damage imposed so that things don't take forever, but if creatures are hitting at the minimum, it will take a very, very long time. With one important exception. Constructed walls and buildings use the sim, but I ran into some issues with natural walls, so these are still using the mining skill, body size and weapon size. Hopefully, I can still get the material portion handled soon. I may still have to fudge some stuff if copper picks are too slow, since that would break the game, and it's a bit worrisome. The next question comes in from DPH Kraken, and they write, Dwarf Fortress has a lot of elements that you might find in a survival game. Weather, food, injuries, and even the kidnapping action in adventure mode. The current roadmap covers features like warfare, missions, cabins, and more broadly, magic and politics. How much do you envision more challenging survival elements being part of the game, and where might they fit into the general development themes? And Tarn's response is, it all just fits into the simulationist mode of the game. We're happy to do more of it. It has caused a bit of a stall on wide parts of adventure mode, since I thought I'd be doing various crafts, etc. in more detail, but ultimately there hasn't been enough time. There are various other problems and issues. Disease, for instance, would mostly be annoying and random, but we still want to do something with it. In adventure mode, it's more easy to require certain gear and knickknacks, and we'd like to. But it doesn't carry over to fort mode as easily. Since you can just have so many items moving around, there's not enough time for the hauling and creation of them. Even clothing wear has been a mess here and there, and we still need multiple features to mitigate that. As much as I'd like it to all be simmed, it's all a case by case, like everything. Having realistic mining rubble would nullify important modes of play, and just gradually be annoying. More realistic farming brings some good and some bad. It should definitely be more interesting, but if it's too realistic, it would feel very random. That might not be a bad thing, but it would suck to lose a fort to a random famine. That can't be survived because the whole region is hit by, examples, a drought, and so forth. And a question from Pad, and they say, so it occurs to me that the 20th anniversary of our public release of Dwarf Fortress, being 219319A, is coming up next August. Any plans for how you're going to mark the occasion? And Tarn's response is, the only thing that came up so far was that boxed version of the game with the Gorlak. But for us, I'm not sure. It's always around Zach's birthday, so we'll probably try to do something. It would be fun to involve other people again, but it's hard to set stuff up now. But it still feels a long way off. I mean, not on an event planning calendar. It's pretty tight, but in a general sense. The next question comes in from Fantastic Dwarf, and they say, Hi Toady, with googly eye dwarves joining us for forts in version 53.06, do you think the artistic direction of the Steam edition will take more inspiration to the expressive facial styles only recently seen from mod projects such as Creature Graphics Expanded? I see the comparison here, not that dwarf eyes were grossly controversial. I just don't personally remember Dwarf Fortress having any explicit clauses that it'd be possible to reapply community mod contributions consensually. If you both struck an artistic style that could be derived as mutual. I'm probably just wrong, and of course I don't speak for the CGE since I didn't make or contribute to it. There was a whole thing with RimWorld seemingly lifting fan-made mods, like Void Travel with moving structures, and then expanding it outwards into paid DLC content as some questionable practice, not including the modders through the process. But again, there may have been many terms included in their EULA that made this completely valid. And Tarn's response is, the old eye pixels were being palletized to the skin color of the dwarf, which was an error, and as far as I understand it, we just made these pixels a non-palletized white color. I'm not aware of the mod project. The next question comes in from Stained Class, and also Silverwing. They're talking about wagons and rams. Let's dive in. Stained Class writes, do you plan to add evolutions or variations of the rams, like ones with protective roofs and wheels? And Silverwing adds on, have wagons lost relevance all of a sudden? You see, being in the middle of the Siege update, I couldn't help but noticing that their current status is, or was, somewhat of a placeholder according to their raws. And Tarn's response is, I thought about the roofed rams, yeah, but I didn't want to have a headache about whether it involved a second Z level or not. I didn't think about wheels, though I did think about wagons and how it might relate, but rewriting wagons was too big of a project to take on at the time. Wagons as creatures with wagon wood is very silly, if self-endearing. Ultimately, they should be the same kind of vehicle, but I haven't expanded that framework very much with rams, and I'm still pondering how to go about it. The next question comes in from Ramiel, and they say, how are things going on full keyboard-only support? I remember you were waiting for the Lua update before looking at it again. I don't think anyone's asked since a few months before that hit, so fingers crossed you have at least a vague idea of what to expect. I absolutely love Dwarf Fortress and have been playing since the early 40D days, but I hate to admit that I've barely touched it since the Steam release. All the new content looks so amazing, and I don't mind learning new keybinds, but for some reason, every time I try, the mandatory mouse usage, it just makes the game practically unplayable for me. As a longtime fan, I'm definitely used to long waits for updates, and I don't mind it at all, but I'm really hoping I can get back to digging out new forts sooner rather than later. And Tarn's response is, it's still the Lua update. The plan is to get the interface into the Lua scripts, and that should facilitate as much keyboard as anybody wants. I'm still not sure when we'll expand the Lua to that point. And a question from someone over there, and they say, hey Toady, are there any plans to have the Steam Cloud work with Dwarf Fortress? And this is kind of Tarnception, because Tarn quotes a post from Zasudra where they quote Tarn's previous post on this subject back from June 2023, where Tarn writes, saves can be very large, so I don't think it can be a default option, given how long it would take to sync saves. It might be possible to make it optional, but the very fast way of setting up a sync folder doesn't seem to do that. We're open to doing it, but it might require a small workshop-like push to get it to function. And then, Tarn's response to the initial question here is, the saves can be large, so it hasn't been a priority, since it would need to be a default off option. A question comes in from Vivalis, and they say, I know that this comes up a lot, and I apologize if it's been vaguely touched in recent Future of the Fortress replies, and isn't exactly set in stone. But what do you plan on working at after the Siege updates? Is Villains going to get a finishing pass where it got halted before the Steam work, or is it to the map rewrite and Myth and Magic after the Siege stuff? I know you've talked about not necessarily doing big chunks or the big wait, so maybe it's more of a all of the above. I'm just generally curious. And Tarn's response is, we haven't updated the dev page yet. I anticipate the dev page being updated reasonably soon, since we did some Siege stuff, and are getting ready for the next push. But yeah, we aren't doing huge releases anymore. I think the Siege update was a good sized chunk, and that size of release might not be a bad model going forward. And a quick series of small questions from Immortal D, and they say, do y'all still have Turkey Day out there? And Tarn's response is, yep, had some meats and things. And Immortal D follows with, is the setting for Invader Cap of monsters and soldiers being locked in an intentional change? I could have sworn we used to be able to change this during Fortress mode. Are you planning to continue updating military systems in the short term? And Tarn's response is, there are some new controls on the waves, and they've probably settled out, but I'm not 100% sure. There still is a gamey improvement point type thing because not enough things are modeled in the invading site and in the world, so the world would rapidly become too simple and easy if it weren't there. So yeah, it's not yet settled what should be a setting yet, and we'll have plenty of plans ready soon. And a quote comes in from Amand, and they say, it seems that tavern brawls, which I believe many players tend to misidentify as loyalty cascades, are exclusively triggered when tantruming drunks throw something and hits someone, or causes them to dodge the thrown item, but never when the tantrumer starts fistfights. Is there any reason why this is so? And will this ever change in the future? And are there any plans to make brawling, and by extension, beatings administered in justice as well? You know, less lethal than it currently is. I quite like the concept of tavern brawls, but they spread way too far and almost instantaneously from the tavern it originates from. And the result is way too many deaths. And Tarn's response is, if that's the case, it's possible it's misidentifying the conflict level. For instance, interpreting the throw as a lethal, non-brawl attack. If that's the case, it's a bug. I don't know if brawling itself will become much less dangerous. We have to be careful not to make unarmed creatures and natural creatures even more ineffective, but it's definitely broken now. And that brings us to the end of this month's Future of the Fortress. And holy crap, it's already December. It's been a long year, but it's been a wild one, at least for me. I don't know about everybody watching, but I've changed a lot of things behind the scenes on the channel this year, and hopefully I'll have a video kind of talking about some of the stuff that I've been doing behind the scenes. Obviously, it's nothing as crazy as the shift from daily content to the hour-long uploads, but at least from my perspective, it's been a similar level of shift. All that being said, I would also like to remind everybody that we still have 2 more months worth of draws to win copies of the Adventure Mode soundtrack on record. If you would like to sign up for a chance to win one of these draws, simply sign up to my newsletter, which can be found on my website, blindirl.com. The newsletter itself is free, and your name will just be chucked in with the pile of everybody whose emails are signed up for that newsletter. Just keep an eye out for a direct email from me sometime on New Year's Eve. Thank you very much for watching. It's been a hell of a year, and I'll see you in the next one.